and then share just the new program guidelines, which we have captured from the press release. So Marva, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for attending today. Forgive me, I have had a really bad cold, and this is my second week, so my voice goes in and out. So you guys are gonna have to be really kind to me today with your chat questions, okay? Ask for pity. So the portal relaunched yesterday. Keeping in mind during that portal pause, our community and they were still submitting cases that had escalated to having court cases for eviction or that had utility shutoffs. So we're proud to say that we were able to keep folks' utilities on, and we were also able to stop evictions from happening. So the program changes are related specifically, mostly centered around income. We've reduced max income from 80% to 50%. And this chart right here shows you by county what that income looks like. The maximum rental assistance was $2,000. We've changed that to $1,500 per month. And the maximum utility assistance is $500 per month. That $500 per month maximum utility are utilities that are in your tenants' names, and we can pay those directly to the utility company. The $1,500 in max rent is anything that's on your ledger for the month that is over $1,500 will now be the responsibility of your tenant to pay to you directly. Regarding room rentals, that max rent is $600 per month. And households are still able to receive updates for past due, current, and future rent, and they can utilize 18 months of utility assistance. So if they've not utilized the utility assistance program and they've maxed out, can qualify for 18 months of utility assistance as long as they meet the qualifications for the new program. I would say that those are most of the changes that we've made to the program. Regarding best practices, again, your tenants can go in, they can recertify. You as landlords can still submit cases on behalf of a tenant. We are requiring additional documents centered around income. And so prior to the portal relaunch, tenants were able to complete an income attestation form and just self-attest as to what their income was. We are now requiring income documents, which are the standard ones that you as landlords are probably familiar with. When you qualify your tenants for the units, we can accept tax returns, pay stubs, we can accept award letters, and things of that nature. If we have an adult in the household that is not working, that is listed on our lease, or that is submitted as a household occupant and they have zero income, or if we have folks that the entire household has zero income, we have collaborated with our communities. Our community navigators will be assisting those folks with submitting applications. And so we're hoping that the navigators would also be able to get them some additional resources to get them back on their feet while we're working to get rent and utilities paid for them. Just as best practices, I want to remind you when you're submitting the case, or if you get a case that's sent your way, we do look at the parcel search. So we want to make sure that the owner of record is listed on the lease agreement. For our larger landlords, we know that there's been some challenges with this. We send the team that's auditing files a list of our large landlords, and they're able to approve those in case the name looks a little bit different than what might be on the parcel search. For our smaller landlords and individual owners, you want to make sure that either the name that's on the parcel search is what's on the lease and that W-9, or we're going to be asking for a property management agreement if we see that the owner of record differs from the lease or landlord that was submitted to us. The other thing I want to mention is that make sure that your rent ledger is up to date. If you have a case that's kind of carried over into the next month, you're going to want to make sure that you upload a new rent ledger so that we can get the most current amount of rent paid on behalf of your tenant. And then for our newer move-in folks that are looking for security deposit assistance, you can upload either that lease or the welcome letter, and we would be able to process an application with either of those two documents. The other thing I wanted to discuss quickly is that I've gotten emails from landlords and tenants saying that their case was approved and it kind of moved back and forth. We do typically approve batches or make payments on batches about once to twice a week. We pull a batch report and there will be several cases or a percentage of cases that may be pulled out for an additional audit, just to make sure that we've done everything that we are supposed to on all of these cases. So you may see some of the cases move in and out of statuses. Don't be too alarmed. If it stays in a status that you're uncomfortable with, such as like a DSHA auditor or something like that, remember you can always reach out to us directly, and we can give you an update on what's happening with your case. COVID hardship forms are still required in each case. Those are forms that are in the portal, and the tenant can go in there and they can sign those right from their phone or from their computer. And again, the income attestation form that I know some of you may have that you were sending to your tenants, that form is no longer allowed. We have a new income attestation form. And for those folks that need that income attestation form because they have zero income, again, they will have to apply through a community navigator. I think those are all of the updates that we have. So we're open for questions. Yes, the 18 months of assistance does include assistance from prior to this. Those 18 months of assistance can go back to April of 2020.
Okay. Please feel free to place additional questions in the chat. I will begin with a few of the ones submitted on the registration form. The first one, which is, since the portal reopened, do old applicants have to reapply?
So for cases that are in progress, that were prior to the portal pausing, if those cases are currently being worked, they would not have to reapply unless their case is denied. And just to let everybody know, we did send out a mass email that basically said that for documents that are being requested, if we don't receive those documents by tomorrow, their case is in jeopardy of being closed. So that can happen. Please, please, please reach out to your tenants. Make sure that they're checking their application and or contacting the call center to make sure that there's no outstanding documents. If they do get denied, or if, for whatever reason, we don't get documents from them because they haven't responded, they can reapply, but they'll fall under the new guidelines.
Okay, so we had a question in the chat, which is, where can you get in touch with a community navigator? And I've just placed that link in the chat. Another question, does DHAP provide promise to pay letters?
So I'm not sure if that's a promise to pay for a utility or a promise to pay for a landlord. Typically for a landlord, we're not doing promise to pay letters because the landlord has access to the portal to kind of follow along what's going on with that case. Regarding utilities, we do have relationships with all of the utility providers. So we are able to send an email to get information regarding that utility if we need it, and to also update the utility provider on the status of a case.
Okay. Can those with no rental history, first apartment, for example, apply for DHAP if they need assistance with first month's rent and security deposit?
Yes, so we can pay security deposit up to $1,500, and we can also assist. We pay in 3-month increments. So if you had somebody, for example, that was moving in to a new apartment in November, we could pay their security deposit, we could pay their November rent, and then December and January as well.
Okay. How long do you have to be late for rent? And then how delinquent do you have to be for utility bills under this program?
So there's no amount of time that you have to be delinquent on either of them. The program is for arrears for rent, and it can also be for future rent. So if you qualify for the program, and you're not delinquent in rent and you're looking to get assistance for future months, we can do that. As I said, we pay 18 months of utility assistance. We have quite a few tenants that submit a utility only case every month, and we pay that utility bill.
Okay. We have someone who has tried to create a profile in the portal, but it says the token has expired. Where can they go for assistance and how can they get a new link to log in?
They're going to want to call the call center because the call center will either be able to navigate them through how to fix it, or they'll have to submit a ticket to Yardi to get that fixed.
Okay, and I'm going to place the call center number in the chat now. Okay. If we have received assistance from Delaware State and the resident has not paid the difference owed, are we able to file in court? You can
So
actually.
I'm not an attorney, so I can't answer that question. So you'd probably have to speak to your legal counsel to get some direction on that.
Okay, we have a tenant that has a delinquent water bill. It's a single family home. Water bill remains on the landlord's name. How can we apply, or can we tell the tenant to apply for your program?
So again, if the utility bill is in the tenant's name, we can pay that directly to the utility provider. If the utility is in the landlord's name, like I know in the city of Wilmington, for example, all of the bills that are associated with that property related to water and sewer are in the name of the landlord. You can include the amount due on your ledger. If it doesn't exceed the $1,500 a month in rent, then we would be able to assist with the portion of that utility bill. So for example, let's say you have a tenant and their monthly rent is $1,200 a month and there's a $100 utility bill that's under the $1,500 max. So you would submit the ledger with the amount of rent that was due and the amount of water bill that was due for that month.
Oh.
I'm going to say also the lease is going to also have to state that the tenant is responsible for that utility payment.
Can the DHAP program help a tenant get electric cut back on?
So we can definitely help with that. It is also dependent on sometimes on the amount of that utility bill that is due. I'm going to use really easy math right now. We can pay up to 18 months in utility assistance if we get a utility bill and I've seen them like that are $10,000. We've gotten some really large utility bills. So for example, if we get a utility bill, it's a large amount, and we need to break it down by months to see how many we can pay. If their utility bill is $100 a month, we would take the 100 times it by 18, and then we add an additional 500 for cushioning for the months when maybe you're not using your air conditioning or your heat. And so that's the maximum amount that we would pay. One of the other things that I want to bring up, we've had a lot of questions on this recently. We do not assist with deposits. So we've had some utility providers that even though we've paid their utility and gotten it back from a shut-off standpoint, they're still requiring, for example, like maybe a $500 deposit that kind of carries on that bill. DHAP can't pay that deposit. My understanding is that there are other organizations, maybe DHSS or Catholic Charities, that can assist with those if that tenant qualifies for their programs.
Okay, how long does it take from a batch being processed to the landlord receiving the funds?
So that it just kind of differs. It depends on if the landlord has opted for ACH or if the landlord has opted for a check payment. If it's an ACH payment, it's usually about 7 days, but keep in mind if there's a holiday or something like that, it could extend a little bit longer. If they've opted for the check payment, those checks are processed in Texas, and depending on mail and holidays and things of that nature, I would allow 2 to 3 weeks for you to receive that payment.
Okay. When helping a family that is homeless, is there still an option to check that on the application, or how can we, I think it's process the application faster?
So I'm not really sure what the question. I mean, yes, you can check off as homeless, but nothing's going to happen with that application until they've secured a rental unit. Our recommendation has always been to not submit an application until a unit has been found, because the applications are processed and there's a time limit. So if we're requesting documents such as a lease, a ledger, or something like that, there's no landlord associated with that case. The case would get closed, and we would recommend that that tenant reapply once they found housing.
Okay. If the tenant had a past utility bill from a previous residence and now current, but the electric is still in the landlord's name, does DHAP assist them with the bill in the landlord name, or will they assist with the tenant with the previous bill?
So we only pay the bill associated with the property that is currently occupied by the tenant, and we will only pay the utility bill in the where they are living, where the tenant is living, and if that bill is in the tenant's name. That is the only time we would pay that utility bill directly to the utility provider. Again, if the lease stipulates that the tenant is responsible for making a payment on that utility bill, and that bill is in the landlord's name, then the landlord needs to include the amount on their ledger. And if it doesn't max out the $1,500 in rent, then we would either be able to pay the full balance or a portion of it.
Okay. I've had a tenant ask me for a ledger for future rent. I tell them I can only do a ledger for months behind. Is that the best way to proceed, or is that correct? Should I do a ledger for future rent?
So no, you don't need to do a future rent ledger. I think what happens is there's a little bit of confusion. Each time we review a case, we will need an updated ledger. That ledger needs to be updated to the current month that we are in. So for example, we're in the month of October right now. So if you submitted a ledger today, that ledger needs to be through till October. And the reason why we do that is because there's sometimes that a case may get submitted. Let's say a case was submitted in September. We're now reviewing it, in October. We want to make sure that if there's anything outside of the normal rental expenses, if there's a late fee, you're able to put that on the updated ledger. But we don't need a ledger to pay the future rent. We just need a current ledger showing payments to date. And if no payment was made in September and no payment was made in October, you're going to want to put what is owed, rent, late fees, if there's a court fee. And again, those are all things that we can pay under the new program guidelines at the maximum of $1,500.
Can a landlord send a non-renewal letter to a DHAP tenant 90 days prior to lease termination?
So again, we don't monitor renewals and non-renewals. My best practice would be that if you are definitely doing a non-renewal for a tenant, make sure that your tenant is fully aware of that. And then I would upload with your ledger the non-renewal letter or just a document basically saying that, for example, if you're doing a non-renewal and the tenant needs to be out by the end of November, so you wouldn't be asking for December rent, you could potentially just do a document or create a document or write a handwritten note or put it on the ledger somewhere that you're only looking for payments through till the month that they'll be living there. Because if you don't do that, and we do pay future rent, because traditionally we're just paying those 3 months of future rents, we don't want there to be a circumstance where now you have to send back money and that tenant's not able to use those months towards a new unit. And the other thing that can sometimes happen is that there'll be a confusion, with the tenant applying for rental assistance at a new place, and we've already paid through till, future months.
Okay.
Delaware makes it a little bit challenging for us because in Delaware, when your lease expires, it automatically goes to month. There's other states that require that the lease, it's a legal document, and if it's outside of those lease terms, then you're not in compliance. And Delaware allows the landlord to just kind of let that lease travel for as many years, as you deem appropriate, unless you make a change to the amount of rent. And regarding that, I do want to say that if you've done a rent increase and you haven't done a lease renewal, we are only going to pay what is listed on that lease. If you upload a ledger and there's a difference because you've increased that, we'll need a documentation that's been signed and dated by both parties so that we know that rent difference and the date and when to start that.
Okay. So the tenant no longer lives at my property, but still owes rent or delinquent rent to me. Will this program help?
So no, we are only paying for tenant occupied properties. If the tenant did not submit an application while they were in the unit, or if the landlord submitted an application while they were in the unit and the tenant never responded, then there's not much that we can do about it. The tenant has to be living in the property in order for us to pay any sort of rent.
Okay. We have a tenant approved for balance due in the month of October and November. There is no other information in the portal after November. Do we send an invoice to the tenant or submit a ledger or invoice into the portal?
So currently, we're only paying through till November. When we start reviewing newer cases, we'll bump that out to we'll start paying December rents. So if they're paid through November, when they recertify in November for December rent, that's when you're going to want to upload the most recent ledger.
Okay. I have a tenant who will be vacating my property by the end of this month. I've submitted an application for rental assistance back in 2020. I've yet to receive any assistance. When I call, I hear the case is still processing while they confirmed that they received all the necessary documents. What should I do now?
If you could reach out to us after this call, when Lori sends out the follow-up information, you can contact us with the case number and we can take a look and see what's going on with that case.
Okay. If a tenant has already received DHAP assistance, can they reapply?
They can reapply as long as they've not maxed out their 18 months of assistance, and they can apply if they qualify under the updated program guidelines.
Okay. If they want to reapply, how would they do that?
They would go to our website and they would apply through the portal link. It's the same way that we've been doing it consistently. If they have questions and need some assistance, then they would want to contact one of our community navigators, and the community navigator could either do the application for them, or they could also contact the call center to get a little bit of direction regarding what they need to do. Keep in mind that the call center is really there just to answer questions. They can look at a case and tell you what status it is in and what documents are needed. They can escalate things like IT tickets, but that is the limit of their capacity.
Okay, we received an overage payment on for what's on the ledger. Who can I contact or email?
You can send an email directly to us. Lori will make sure that it gets to me or to whatever department that needs to get to.
Oops. I'm just gonna put my email in the chat now. How can we make sure the tenant uses the correct email address for our property? so that they show up on one portal for me to load all the documents.
My recommendation is if you're, to send out some sort of, however it is that you communicate with your tenants, to make sure that they have, whether it's a document that has the exact information that needs to be entered, you can do that. I don't know if you're communicating them via text, email, but we always recommend that as the landlord, you make sure that your tenants have the best information. And if they say they've submitted a case and you haven't gotten that case yet, you're going to want to ask them, what information they submitted for the landlord.
I have a tenant who is 5 months late and is stating DHAP is reviewing their case. How can landlord obtain information on case status?
The landlord should be able to log into the portal and see that tenant if that tenant has indeed applied for the program. If you haven't gotten an email that that specific tenant put an application in, then it sounds like there's either something that either they've not submitted an application or that they've put the wrong landlord information in. So I would have a conversation with the tenant and ask for the case number and ask for some specific information. And again, the call center is able to give you basic information regarding the case.
When a tenant is recertifying, can they use the same email they used before when they originally applied?
So that email address is what they're going to log in using that email address. So that email address is really important. It's very hard to change that. So they are going to have to use the email address that they used when they applied initially. If they have issues with the email, like they don't have access to that email, they're probably going to want to contact the call center to see if there's any support ticket that can be put in to assist them, or potentially some sort of a password reset.
And a similar email question, are we able to change the email address on the landlord profile?
So that's like a deep question because it depends on, there's lots of different, so in the landlord portion, there's admins. Our recommendation is that you don't mess around with that too much. If you need to figure something out, or if there's something that you need to make a change, I would send us an email directly. And if it's like an easy fix or something that's not going to, affect your current cases, then we can have a conversation about that. But if it's something larger that potentially Yardi needs to do, then we'd have to put a ticket in.
If the ledger says the tenant is up to date on rent through November and they reapply but aren't approved and paid out for December plus until the late fee, will DHAP reimburse for late fees?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's another reason why we ask you to always make sure we have the most updated ledger possible, because you can go back and ask for late fees. So if we paid through and, for example, let's say the payment came in late or something of that nature, and there's, a $25 late fee, you can submit the ledger that has the late fees from, the late payments that were made previously. And again, if it doesn't max out the 1,500, then we'll pay that. Or you can ask your tenant to make those late payment fees.
Okay. My tenant started an application with an old landlord, needs to start a new application with a new landlord. Is there a way to remove the old landlord, or should they just submit again under the new landlord?
So they're going to need to submit again, and they're going to need to put the new landlord in there. For cases that are kind of, a little bit confusing like that, sometimes that can confuse the tenant. I would strongly recommend that they go to a community navigator or contact the call center to get some assistance with that.
And how can you remove a tenant that is not your tenant from your profile?
I don't think you can do that. I mean, we don't have the ability to delete tenants. If a tenant, enters the wrong information, there's not much we can do about it. It kind of stays with, I mean, the case can be denied, but that is, real-time information that was submitted, and we don't have access to just deleting that sort of stuff.
Okay, application question. Um, why is the submit button not showing sign and date any longer?
I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know if they've made some changes. I mean, if this is, new, the portal relaunched yesterday, so I'm not certain.
Okay. Um, what should I do if my case was not addressed during the program pause?
Well, the program pause was just pausing for tenants to be able to apply or recertify. We haven't stopped reviewing cases, so anything that was submitted prior to the pause has still continuously, it's in either being worked on or it's in queue to be worked on. It's nothing that we didn't just say we're deleting all these cases. We're still working those cases. So as long as your tenant is submitting documents as requested, then that case should not be denied. If we're requesting documents from the tenant and they don't meet the deadline, there's a 48-hour request for documents, and also tomorrow was a hard deadline for all documents that have been requested. So potentially that case could be denied if the tenant has not responded to phone calls, text, and they are they're doing phone calls, they're doing a text message, and they're doing an email. So if the tenant has not responded, then they're going to have to recertify if their case is denied.
Okay. I am buying a property that has a tenant in place who has received and applied for this program. Will it transfer?
It will not. So here's the big challenge. So for something like that, you're going to have to submit a higher level of documentation. When we do a parcel search, if you've just purchased the property, it's going to take a while for your name to transfer over to that parcel search. So I recommend that you upload your purchase paperwork so that we can see that you have ownership. And it really depends on what your agreement was with the sellers, whether they're transferring rent that they may receive over to you. So it can go a number of different ways, but no, that would not transfer over. And you're going to have to remind your tenant that when they do recertify, or if for whatever reason their case gets denied and they need to resubmit or recertify, they're going to need to put new landlord information in there, or everything's going to go to that old landlord.
Can a landlord start a new application for a tenant that was denied before because they failed to produce all the information that was needed?
I mean, if here's the thing, if that's how you want to spend your time submitting applications for tenants that are not submitting documents, that's completely up to you. If it were me and I were the landlord, I would email or hand a form to that tenant with a list of community navigators, and have them meet with that community navigator. And then I would wait for the email from the portal that says that your tenant submitted an application. When the community navigators submit those applications, they have all of the documents, they've done their due diligence. So generally, it's just a matter of you as the landlord submitting what you need to do to get that case to approval. If there's a history of a tenant not submitting documents, typically we don't find that changing if you keep submitting new cases.
Is mortgage assistance available through this program? So mortgage assistance is not available through the DHAP rental assistance program. It is available through the Delaware Mortgage Relief Program. That program opened in June, and I can place the link in the chat as well. Okay. How long will this program be running or available?
So the program ends in 2025, or whenever the funds are depleted.
And what happens after a tenant maxes out at 18 months?
And it's time for them to start paying that rent and those utilities on their own.
Okay, I believe this is a follow-up from the application question. but I'm not able to find the submit button in the portal. What should I do?
Contact the call center.
How long will it take to process new applications?
So again, I can never give a time frame on that because it depends on how, what we got. If there's outreach that's needed to the tenant, generally, if we get cases and they're pretty clean cases, we're trying to get through them as quickly as possible. But it's really dependent on if there's documents that are needed. I anticipate that we're going to have tenants that are not used to submitting income documents. So if they're not submitting the income documents for all of the adults that are in that household, it may take a little bit longer for the tenant to be able to provide those documents for us. So, I think having good communication with your tenant, maybe helping that tenant if they need copies of something or if they're having trouble uploading documents, you may be able to assist with that. And again, referring them to a community navigator if you know that there's going to be a challenge with them uploading multiple documents outside of the income attestation form that was only required before.
Lost my chat box. Um,
For questions related to specific cases that you're having issues with, again, I'm going to ask that instead of putting them in the chat, that you just reach out to us after this meeting because it's hard for me to give answers that are case specific unless I am able to take some time and look through that case.
and I am again placing my email in the chat as well for you to send your case number and concerns to. Why are so many months of assistance being provided at one time when there are so many who need help? If you could just go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. We can pay a maximum of 18 months. We do future months at 3 months in advance. So if we have somebody that's delinquent, by 5 months or 6 months or 12 months, then we're able to pay those big chunks. Our program has been highly recognized as for the state of Delaware as having lowered our eviction rate. So at the end of the day, our DSHA is really focused on keeping folks housed. We understand that rents are high and, everybody has, expenses and COVID was a challenge for everybody and people trying to get back on their feet. So we really look at this program as keeping people homed, and that's our goal.
Yep, I will also say if you want to expand, I see you're expanding on the question in the chat, so that's great. I also just want to throw out that we are following U.S. Treasury guidelines and rules. We have some say in these numbers and how the program is run, but mainly we are following the federal guidelines and rules that were set to us when we received this funding.
Yeah, and I want to say that I've had some really fabulous stories from tenants that are capable of paying rent, but it leaves them with nothing else, and they've been able to use this assistance program to pay down debt, to pay off student loans, and to maybe purchase that car that they've needed because they've been using public transportation to get to work. So it's made a big difference in a lot of the folks' lives that we've assisted, and it's so nice to hear the stories from people that have really had such a good experience with the DHAP program.
Okay. Has the income guidelines changed? And if so, how does that affect someone who has already received help before? So yes, the income limits have changed to 50% AMI. What that exactly means for each household and per person is available on the DE COVID Housing Help website under eligibility. Again, anyone who applies after October 12th will be subject to the new guidelines. So if you are over the new income limits, you are no longer eligible for the program. if you are within the income limits, you are still able to take advantage of the program. Can money be paid to a property agent when the landlord is not around?
Yeah, as long as we have that property management agreement and the W-9 is set to pay to the EIN number of the property management company.
Okay. What are the statistics for cases submitted but not followed up on?
Um, I don't have any statistics. I mean, I'm sure those are things that we could pull. I mean, there's so many reasons. I mean, we have tenants that, again, it could be a tenant that's just not responding because they're too busy. Maybe they don't care. We have tenants that have submitted applications that maybe, or a landlord, submitted an application and put the wrong email address for the tenant, or the tenant doesn't have access to that email address. So it's really hard to determine why or how many cases are like that. But I mean, I can say that we try to do our due diligence with the text message, the email, and the phone calls. I almost feel like sometimes phone calls are a waste of time because nobody answers their phone when they're getting a phone call that they don't recognize. But our text message and email has, it works very well as long as we have the correct cell phone number and the correct email address. So if nothing else, please, please, please reach out to your tenants because sometimes they change emails or phone numbers. Make sure that the applications have the correct information for your tenant.
Okay. I see everyone's comments about not being able to see my email address. I've placed it in the chat again, and I'm also doing it again now. Okay. If someone is capable of paying and just doesn't pay, do they still get past due, current, and future rent?
I mean, we approve cases from minimal documents that are submitted. It's the lease, their income, and a ledger. So we don't necessarily know that person's circumstances. We approve on just the Treasury guidelines, and those are income related. So we wouldn't be approving or non-approving cases because of people's ability to pay rent or not pay rent. While we're waiting for the next question, I just wanted to take some time to really thank all of the landlords that are on this call. I know that it's been like a challenging time with the portal pause and, trying to work through cases, but we've been working really hard. We have a great internal team. Everybody at DSHA has really worked very hard to make this program successful. And although we do get complaints from, landlords and tenants that aren't happy with the time that it takes, but we have thousands of cases. We're working with multitude of personalities and capabilities of folks that have applied. So, we do our best every day to try to make this program as successful as possible. And we couldn't do it without you guys. So we really appreciate everything that you've done. And, again, if you have a challenging case, feel free to reach out to us. And we always do our best to get an answer to you as quickly as possible.
Okay. My tenant applied through a community navigator. Um, where should I go for case updates on this specific case?
I would ask your tenant for an update. The navigators are in close contact with that tenant. Generally, they have, they have their phone numbers, their emails, their texting, they have phone conversations. So I would ask that tenant just for kind of an update and they can reach out to their navigator, or they should probably know what's going on because they're having those conversations regularly.
Is DHAP mainly processing applications submitted from August 12th onward?
So we are submitting everything we are processing all cases as they come in, and we work on those cases in the order that they come in.
Okay. Where can you find the income guidelines? Those are available on the DE COVID Housing Help website, specifically under the eligibility section. I placed that link in the chat as well.
Yeah, and Lori's team, thank you, Lori, to the PR team. They did an amazing job of getting our website updated with all of the current requirements and guideline changes. So if you take some time to go to our website and check out the landlord portion of it, you can also check out the tenant portion. It kind of walks you through the process. It'll give you a narrative on those changes, but they did an amazing job. Lori, thank you to you and your team for getting that taken care of so quickly for us.
Not a problem. So I see that we are close to time. We will continue with the questions in the chat and then wrap up at 4 p.m. We had money deposited with no name attached. What should we do?
Yeah, so there was about a 3-week period where, for whatever reason, there was an issue within Yardi where those automated payment notices were not going out. Um, we emailed them consistently, and we got that resolved. But if you do have payments that you received and you're not sure who they were for, please feel free to reach out to us. Lori will get you in contact with us, with me, and we'll track those payments down for you.
If you have a tenant that's moved into your property without a lease, the previous tenant left and you let them move in, can you assist with rent if they have no income?
So I think they have no lease, no income. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge because what we need to see is that there's a landlord-tenant relationship. So we're going to need to have some sort of documentation that rent, that there is an agreement. And depending on the level that the case is reviewed, we may require proof of 3 past rental payments.
Okay. Why would a case get denied when all of the documents were provided and the case states denied, no appeal allowed?
So technically, we don't deny cases if all of the documents were submitted. Quite often what happens is, yes, documents were submitted, but they may have been incorrect. I see one of the biggest ones is there's 2 of them. There's the COVID hardship form, which in, the last program, it required the tenant to check off several boxes. And we would email them and say, you need to complete the COVID hardship form and check off all the boxes. And they would just upload us the same document that they had sent before without the boxes checked off. The income attestation form also, they would submit an income attestation form and we would send them multiple emails saying, please add all occupants that are over 18. And they would consistently just send us the same income attestation form without adding the additional members of the household on there. So those are the 2 of the bigger ones. So again, typically those cases would not be denied. We may have all of the documents, but those documents might not be accurate.
Yep. Why did the program change its income limits?
So under federal, we had money from Treasury. We were in ERA 1. We've moved over to ERA 2 funding, and that change was made at the end of September. Starting in October, we're utilizing ERA 2 funding, which was much less than the ERA 1 funding. And what we're really trying to do is making sure that we're really helping the households that need the most assistance with rent. And we're trying to make sure that this program lasts as long as possible so we can help as many of those folks as possible. At the higher guidelines, income guidelines, if we had kept going on that trajectory, we would have run out of money a lot faster. So we're really looking at the program, and there may be more changes coming to the program, through till 2025 as we work through the ERA 2 final funding.
Yep, definitely. For someone who calls the call center, what is the expected time frame for a return call?
I don't know. I didn't know that people left messages for the call center. The call center is not able to, no, so generally if you call the call center, they'll give you what information they can. But if you're asking them to have your auditor or supervisor call you, or whoever's working on that case, they don't relay that sort of information. So you would not be getting a call back from an auditor or a supervisor.
Okay. What month are you currently on for payment? I've been waiting for payment since August. All the documents have been submitted.
Again, I can't answer that specifically because we pay cases as they come in and as they're worked. So it just depends on that specific case. Um, you know, if there was a missing document, quite often people will say all of the documents are there. And then when we take a closer look at the case, we determine that no, we've been asking for this additional documentation, whether it's from the tenant or the landlord, and we haven't gotten it yet. Keep in mind that when you contact the call center can look and see that all of the documents that are supposed to be in their buckets are there. But due to privacy, they don't have the ability to open up those documents to see if they've been completed.
Okay. When is the program supposed to end? So the DHAP program will expire in 2025 unless the program funds are exhausted before then. So if we run out of money at the end of 2023, the program will end then. A lot of the changes that were made to income limits and to our program guidelines were to ensure that that did not happen, to ensure that the program was sustainable until 2025 when the program funds are set to expire. However, it is important to note that if the money is exhausted before then, the program will end sooner. I have funds sitting in my account. Is it okay to contact Lori to assist me in finding out who the money belongs to? Yes, you can email me. You can also call the call center, I believe, right, Marva?
No, you'd probably have to reach out to Lori and then we could do some investigation. So the call center can't help with matching up funds to a potential tenant. So that's something that we could do on our end.
Yes, so please reach out to me. Thank you for that clarification. If I'm already set up as a landlord for past months, is there something new or change that I need to do to update or re-register my account?
No, there's nothing that you need to do on your end. As I said, the portal was not shut down. There was nothing, when we switched over from Alita to Yard, there was a big change because we were moving from one software provider to another. In this case, the only thing that changed was we disabled the ability to submit or recertify. So nothing should have changed. If you see something major has changed in your account, please contact the call center. And if you don't get any sort of assistance from them, you can reach out to us directly.
Okay, so I am again placing my email in the chat for all of you. And with that, we are officially at time. We thank you for attending today. We thank you for your questions and your patience throughout the program pause and as we start to reopen. Again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out, and there will be another landlord call next month. You can be on the lookout for an email invitation in the follow-up email that was mentioned at the top of the call. So again, thank you and have a great afternoon.